Welcome to Life Stories, where we share heartfelt journeys of resilience, growth, and new beginnings. Today's story is about Claire, a woman who seemed to have it all: a loving husband, a peaceful home, and a promising future. But one quiet Saturday afternoon, her world was turned upside down by betrayal and unexpected revelations. In the face of heartbreak and loss, Claire discovered her own strength and courage, embarking on a transformative journey to reclaim her life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to follow Claire's story and others like it. Let's begin today's chapter. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind where the world seemed to pause for a moment. The late winter sun bathed my Boston apartment in a warm, golden glow, the kind of light that made everything feel softer, gentler. I was curled up on the sofa with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, savoring the first real moment of peace I'd had in weeks. Michael, my husband of 6 years, was away on yet another business trip. His absences had grown more frequent over the past few months, but I didn't mind having the apartment to myself. The silence was comforting, punctuated only by the soft hum of the fan and the distant chirping of birds outside the window. I'm Claire, a woman who once thought she had everything figured out: a happy marriage, a cozy home, and a life filled with promise. But lately, cracks had begun to show, subtle ones, the kind you try to smooth over and ignore because acknowledging them feels too terrifying. Yet, for now, I pushed those thoughts aside. This is exactly what I needed, I murmured to myself, sinking deeper into the cushions and flipping the page of my book. My mind wandered briefly to Michael, to the long hours he claimed to spend at work. There had been a growing tension in my chest, a knot that tightened whenever I thought too long about his frequent late nights and vague explanations. But I shook it off, scolding myself for being paranoid. He's just dedicated to his work, I thought. That's all it is. The clock ticked on, and as 4:30 approached, I decided to stretch my legs and wandered over to the window. Below me, the neighborhood was alive with its usual energy. Couples strolled hand in hand, their laughter carrying faintly upward. Children chased one another in the nearby park, their squeals a reminder of simpler days. Even the elderly sat on benches, bundled against the lingering chill, chatting and watching the world go by. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of longing for the uncomplicated joy that these strangers seemed to share. And then it happened. A loud, insistent knock shattered the tranquility like glass smashing against the floor. I froze, the sound reverberating through the apartment, echoing off the walls of my mind. My heart raced as I tried to process the interruption. Who could it possibly be? I wasn't expecting anyone. And Michael had his own key. Another knock followed, louder this time, more demanding. Coming, I called out, my voice quivering slightly as I made my way to the door. My hands trembled as I turned the key, bracing myself for whatever or whoever lay on the other side. The sight before me left me speechless. Martha, my mother-in-law, stood there, her large frame blocking the doorway. Her hair was perfectly styled, dyed blonde in a way that hinted she refused to let age take her lightly. Her expression was one of thinly veiled disapproval, a look I had grown all too familiar with over the years. Behind her was Julie, Michael's younger sister, awkwardly balancing several cardboard boxes that nearly obscured her face. Claire, Martha said briskly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. We're here. Here, I repeated, dumbfounded. My eyes darted between the two of them, and then to the piles of luggage that seemed to have multiplied around their feet. Yes, here, Martha said, brushing past me into the apartment as though she owned it. The wheels of her suitcase grated against the hardwood floor, and I winced at the sound. Julie followed closely behind, her steps hesitant, avoiding eye contact as she placed the boxes in the middle of the living room. I was still frozen in place, clutching the doorknob like it was a lifeline. Can I get a glass of water? Do. Martha's voice rang out, dragging me back to the present. Oh, of course. I managed to reply, my feet moving automatically toward the kitchen even as my mind raced with questions. Why were they here? Why now? And why? For heaven's sake. Had they brought so much luggage? As I poured water into glasses, I could hear Martha's heels clicking across the floor. She was already making herself at home, barking instructions to Julie about where to place their things. The familiar critical tone in her voice sent a chill down my spine. Carrying the glasses back into the living room, I found Martha sitting in my favorite armchair, fanning herself dramatically with one of my magazines. Julie stood by the window, her hands clasped nervously in front of her as though she wished she could disappear. Now, Martha began as she accepted the water, taking a sip and grimacing slightly. Let's talk about what's going on here. Her words were clipped, deliberate, and laced with something I couldn't quite place. A sinking feeling formed in my stomach as I sat down opposite her. What exactly is going on? Martha, I asked, my voice firmer now, though my hands still trembled in my lap. Martha leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. We're here to make some necessary changes. Claire, it's clear you need help, and Michael has asked us to step in. Her words hit me like a blow, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Michael had asked them to come here, to interfere in our lives like this. I glanced at Julie, searching her face for some sign of reassurance, some hint that this wasn't as bad as it seemed. But Julie wouldn't meet my eyes. Changes, I repeated, my voice barely more than a whisper. Yes, Martha said, her tone smug, almost triumphant. Necessary changes. In that moment, the warmth of the setting sun seemed to vanish, leaving the room cold and suffocating. The quiet Saturday I had so cherished was gone, replaced by a storm I hadn't seen coming. I sat frozen in the living room as Martha's words settled over me, each one sinking deeper than the last. Necessary changes. What did that even mean? My mind reeled as I tried to comprehend how my life had spiraled into this surreal situation. Martha sipped her water with an air of self-satisfaction, as though her mere presence was the solution to all my supposed problems. Meanwhile, Julie stood by the window, wringing her hands and staring at the street below, her discomfort palpable. For a moment, I thought about confronting them both, demanding answers. But something inside me hesitated. A part of me knew that the real confrontation needed to be with Michael, not his family. What changes? I finally asked, my voice low but steady. Martha smiled, the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. Oh, Claire, don't take it the wrong way, she said, in that patronizing tone I'd come to dread. Michael just thought you could use some help managing the house, keeping things in order. He's been so concerned lately about how stressed you seem. He asked us to step in, to support you. Support me? The word felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't support, it was an invasion. That's not true, I said quietly, my voice gaining strength. Michael hasn't said anything to me about being concerned. If he had issues, he would have talked to me, not gone behind my back to you. Martha's expression hardened, and for a moment, she looked almost amused. Oh, Claire, she said, shaking her head. Michael is just too kind to confront you directly. He's always been like that, putting others first, avoiding conflict. That's why he came to me. Anger bubbled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper now would only give her more power. I think you've misunderstood, I said, standing up and crossing my arms. Michael and I handle our marriage together. If he had concerns, he'd tell me himself. And as for this, I gestured to the suitcases and boxes littering my living room. This isn't support. It's overstepping boundaries. Julie finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should wait until Michael comes back. This doesn't feel right. Martha silenced her with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. Nonsense, she snapped. Michael trusted me to handle this. And that's exactly what I'm doing. At that moment, something clicked inside me. 4 months. I'd been ignoring the signs, the late nights, the vague explanations, the growing distance between Michael and me. But now, as I stood there facing Martha's overbearing presence and Julie's nervous silence, I realized the truth was staring me in the face. Michael wasn't just working late. He was running from something. From us. From me. The knot of anxiety I'd been carrying for months tightened painfully in my chest. But with it came a flicker of clarity. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It wasn't. I think it's time for you both to leave, I said firmly, meeting Martha's gaze. She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my tone. Leave? Claire. Don't be ridiculous. We're staying here to help you. That's final. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. No. Martha. You're not. This is my home. My life. I didn't invite you here. And I don't need your interference. For a moment, Martha looked genuinely taken aback. Julie glanced at me, her expression a mix of relief and fear. I think you should call Michael, I added, my voice calm but resolute. If he wants to discuss this, he can talk to me directly. Until then, I'd like you to leave. Martha opened her mouth to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She huffed, muttering under her breath as she grabbed her suitcase. Come on. Julie, she snapped. Let's go. Julie hesitated, glancing at me one last time before following her mother out the door. As the door clicked shut behind them, the silence was deafening. I sank onto the sofa, my hands trembling. The confrontation had drained me, but it also left me with a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I had taken a step toward reclaiming my life. But as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, another realization hit me. This was just the beginning. Whatever was happening between Michael and me, I needed to face it. No more pretending. No more waiting. That evening, as the sun set over Boston, I made a decision. If Michael wasn't going to be honest with me, I would find the truth myself. Whatever it took. I was done living in the dark. That night, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I tried to distract myself with a book. The same one I'd been reading earlier. But the words blurred together. Meaningless. My thoughts kept circling back to Martha's visit and the bombshell she'd dropped. Michael had confided in her. He had supposedly asked her for help. Yet he hadn't said a word to me. Why? The question gnawed at me as I paced the living room. I thought about Michael's late nights, his hurried excuses, and the way he avoided meeting my eyes whenever I asked about his trips. I had brushed those feelings aside for months, convincing myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But tonight, the pieces began falling into place, and the picture they painted wasn't one I wanted to see. My phone buzzed, startling me out of my thoughts. The screen lit up with Julie's name. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. After all, she had stood there silently while her mother tried to take over my life. But something made me answer. Claire. Julie's voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I needed to say something. What is it? Julie? I asked, trying to keep the exhaustion out of my voice. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she began. For today. For all of it. I didn't know Mom was planning to bring all that stuff or to say what she did. I didn't agree with it. But, you know how she is. I did know. Martha was a force of nature. Impossible to oppose if you weren't willing to withstand the storm. I just felt so awkward. Julie continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. But I should have said something. I should have stood up to her. You didn't deserve that. Her voice cracked, and I felt a pang of sympathy. Julie wasn't like her mother. She had always been quiet, deferential, and stuck in Martha's shadow. I could hear the guilt in her voice, the struggle to break free. "It's okay," I said softly, surprising even myself. "I know you didn't mean for it to happen this way." Julie hesitated, then said, "There's something else. I think you deserve to know, about Michael." My heart sank. I had been dreading this moment. The moment when my suspicions would be confirmed. "I don't have proof," Julie said quickly, "but I've noticed things. The way he talks about his trips. The way he avoids questions. And there's someone at work. A woman named Emily. I don't know for sure, but..." Her voice broke off, and the silence that followed was deafening. "It's okay, Julie," I said, even though it wasn't. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. "Thank you for telling me. Are you okay?" she asked hesitantly. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. "I will be," I said. And I meant it. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the weight of Julie's words settling over me. It was what I had suspected all along, but hearing it out loud made it real. And yet, in that moment, I felt something unexpected: clarity. 4 months. I had been living in a fog, paralyzed by doubt and fear. But now, the path forward seemed clear. I couldn't control Michael's actions or his betrayal, but I could control my response. The next morning, I made a call that would change everything. It was to an old college friend, Rachel, who now worked as a director at a major company in Chicago. We had spoken a few weeks earlier, and she had mentioned an opening in her department, a position that would be a perfect fit for me. At the time, I had dismissed the idea, unwilling to disrupt my life in Boston. But now, disruption felt like the only way forward. "Rachel," I said when she answered, "is that job still available?" Her excitement was palpable as she told me it was. We talked for nearly an hour, discussing the details, the logistics, the possibilities. By the time we hung up, my decision was made. I was moving to Chicago. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The thought of starting fresh in a new city, far from the shadow of Michael and his family, filled me with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. That evening, I began packing. It was a quiet, deliberate process. Each item carefully chosen and folded, a symbol of the life I was leaving behind. I kept my plans to myself, knowing I needed time to prepare before confronting Michael. As I placed the last of my clothes into a suitcase, I glanced at the wedding photo on the wall. Michael and I smiled back at me, young and full of promise. For a moment, a pang of sadness washed over me. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would turn out. But as I looked closer, I saw something else, a woman who had trusted herself enough to believe in love. Now, it was time to trust myself again, not in love, but in my own strength. The following days passed in a blur of preparations and quiet determination. I kept up the facade of normalcy, going through my daily routine while carefully finalizing the details of my move. Each moment felt like a small rebellion, a silent step away from the life I had known and toward something unknown but full of possibility. Then, on Thursday evening, everything changed. I had just finished folding the last of my clothes into my suitcase when the phone rang. The sound startled me, and I stared at the screen for a moment before picking it up. It was Michael. "Hi, darling," he said, his voice carrying a strange tension that made my stomach tighten. "I'm coming home early tomorrow morning. I need to talk to you about something." His tone was off, hesitant in a way that set off alarms in my head. I knew Michael too well. He wasn't coming home early because he missed me. Something else was going on. "That's fine," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We do have a lot to discuss." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the packed suitcase. My heart raced as I thought about the conversation that was waiting for me. It wasn't just about Michael's betrayal, it was about my future. My decision to leave. And the strength I had found to choose myself. The next morning, I heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart pounded as Michael walked into the apartment. His expression guarded. To my surprise, he wasn't alone. Following close behind was a woman I recognized immediately from the photos I had seen on his phone. Emily. I stood there, rooted to the spot. As they both froze in the doorway, Michael's face flushed with embarrassment. And Emily looked like she wanted to disappear. Claire. Michael began, his voice faltering. This isn't what it looks like. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his words. Really? I asked. My voice cold. Because it looks exactly like what I expected. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Michael. Martha stormed into the apartment. Her presence as commanding as ever. Julie trailed behind her, looking pale and uncertain. Clearly, they had come to witness whatever confrontation was about to unfold. What is she doing here? Martha demanded, her eyes narrowing as she pointed at Emily. Michael stumbled over his words, trying to explain, but it was too late. The room erupted into chaos, with Martha berating her son for his behavior, Emily standing awkwardly by the door, and Julie whispering futile attempts to calm her mother. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't my battle anymore. Enough, I said finally, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Everyone turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. Michael, I continued, locking eyes with him. This is your moment. Tell the truth. No more excuses. No more lies. If you have even a shred of respect left for me, be honest, for once. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a heavy sigh. You're right, he said quietly. I owe you that. He admitted to the affair, to the late nights and the lies. He said it had started as something small, something he hadn't meant to let spiral out of control. He apologized, his voice thick with regret. But his words felt hollow. When he finished, the room was silent. Martha looked stunned. Julie's eyes brimmed with tears. And Emily seemed frozen, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Thank you for being honest, I said. But this changes nothing. Michael's head snapped up, and he stared at me in disbelief. Claire, please, he began. We can fix this. I can fix this. No, I said firmly, my voice calm but resolute. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. I'm leaving. Michael. I've already packed. And I've made arrangements. This is goodbye. The weight of my words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw real fear in Michael's eyes. But I didn't waver. Martha, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally found her voice. Claire, don't be rash, she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard it. Think about this. Think about the family. I turned to her, my expression steady. I have thought about it, Martha, and this is the best decision for me. Julie stepped forward then, her voice shaking. I think Claire's right. She deserves to choose what's best for her. Martha looked at her daughter in disbelief. But I could see the truth sinking in. This wasn't a battle she could win. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back one last time. Goodbye, Michael, I said softly. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. And with that, I walked out, closing the door on a chapter of my life that had defined me for too long. The door clicked shut behind me, and for a moment, I stood in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. The gravity of what had just happened began to sink in. I had done it. I had walked away. A mixture of emotions washed over me: relief, sadness, and a surprising sense of liberation. My suitcase felt heavier as I dragged it toward the elevator, not because of its weight but because of everything it symbolized. It was the culmination of 6 years of shared moments. Of love, betrayal, and everything in between. But as the elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, I felt like I was leaving those years behind, shedding the doubts and fears that had clung to me for too long. I stepped out onto the bustling streets of Boston, the crisp winter air biting at my skin. The city was alive, its energy vibrating around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I hailed a cab to take me to Julie's apartment. She had insisted I stay with her for the night before catching my train to Chicago. I had initially hesitated, unsure if I wanted to rely on anyone, even Julie, after everything that had happened. But when I saw her tear-filled eyes as I left, I realized she genuinely wanted to help. Julie met me at the entrance of her building, her usual nervous demeanor replaced by a quiet resolve. "I'm so glad you came," she said, taking my suitcase and leading me inside. Her apartment was small but cozy, decorated in warm tones with little touches of personality that felt distinctly hers. For the first time, I saw Julie as someone separate from her mother's shadow, a woman trying to carve out her own life. "This is nice," I said, settling onto her sofa. "It feels peaceful." Julie smiled shyly as she handed me a cup of tea. "I've been trying to create my own space. It's not much, but it's mine." Her words resonated deeply with me. We sat there for hours, sipping tea and talking. Julie opened up in a way I had never seen before, sharing stories of her struggles with Martha's overbearing nature and her fears of disappointing the family. I found myself sharing more than I had intended, my doubts, my pain, and the bittersweet hope I felt about starting over. "You're so strong, Claire," Julie said, her voice filled with admiration. "I've always envied that about you." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I don't feel strong. Half the time, I don't even know what I'm doing." "But you're doing it," she said. "You're making choices for yourself. That takes courage." Her words lingered with me long after she had gone to bed. As I lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the person I had been when I married Michael, so eager to please, so desperate to belong. That version of me felt like a stranger now. The next morning, Julie surprised me with a gift. It was a small painting, a bird in flight painted in vibrant colors. "I made this a few months ago," she said, handing it to me. "It represents freedom and new beginnings. I think you should have it." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her. "Thank you, Julie, for everything." We shared a quiet breakfast, and then it was time to go. As I stepped into the cab, Julie waved from the sidewalk, her expression a mixture of sadness and pride. The train station was bustling with activity, but I felt oddly calm as I waited for my departure. My phone buzzed with a message from Julie. "You're stronger than you know. Soar high. You deserve it." I smiled, clutching the small painting she had given me. When the train arrived, I boarded with a renewed sense of purpose. As the cityscape blurred into the distance, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't know what awaited me in Chicago, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to face it head-on, to embrace the life I was creating for myself. This was my story now, and I was finally in control of how it would unfold. As the train sped toward Chicago, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. I watched the scenery blur past, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight of my past was behind me, and ahead lay a future of endless possibilities. I didn't know exactly what challenges or joys awaited me, but for the first time, I felt in control of my destiny. The painting Julie had given me rested on my lap, a reminder of the freedom I had reclaimed and the strength I had found within myself. Life wouldn't always be easy, but I knew one thing for certain: I had the power to shape my own path. If this story inspired you, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to catch more life stories filled with hope, resilience, and new beginnings.